Incorporating Feminist Theory and Insights into a Restorative Justice Response to Sex Offenses. This was originally written by C. Quince Hopkins and Mary P. Koss. We're going to be doing an overview today by myself, Valerie Rodriguez. So first and foremost, let's go over a discussion outline. So this article is mostly talking about non-penetrating sexual offenses and acquaintance sexual assaults. It also highlights the failures of the current sex offense response that our criminal justice system has. We're going to be discussing the Resource Project. This is a pilot research project based out of Pima County, Arizona. It primarily focuses on restorative justice, which may be an alternative. That way we can have a response to sexual offenses that are currently going on in the United States. In order to properly conduct this project, the originators of the project did have to get feminist insight from feminist theories, and that did help shape the development of the project. And then we also talk about some concerns that feminist theory advocates did have about this restorative justice response. Before deep diving straight into the restorative justice response, let's talk about the facts. So the first thing we need to know is that 20 to 25% of female students, that's of more than 8 million female students here in the United States, will be raped. That number is astronomical, if you ask me. So the fact that we do have some research that's going to be helping us bring some justice to those survivors and to help this type of issue that we have in the United States is great. Next, there's about 16% of rapes are reported to the police. Out of all the rapes that happen, very few are reported. This is often seen because of fear or victims being that the police are not going to be believing what they say. And granted, this is just us talking about rapes. This does not include any indecent exposure, obscene phone calls, or anyone being observed naked without consent. So just keep that in mind. As I was talking about before, many women have stated they do not believe the criminal justice system hears them or is going to help them, and that's why there is not a lot of reporting of these incidences. And research has actually shown us, sadly, that may be the case, because 50 to 75% of rape cases are declined for prosecution nationwide. So currently, 4 of 10 rapists are rearrested for rape. So they are not giving harsh punishments initially. They are going back out in the community, and then they're getting rearrested for the same crimes. And then again, victims are just not feeling heard. They often feel that rapists may have more rights than them, especially when it comes to going to court. And that is because rapists will often execute their rights and stay silent, and often claim denial of what they did and victim blame. So if very little is being done by our current criminal justice system when it comes to sexual offenses, and if victims are not feeling heard or are too afraid to be going to the police because they feel that they will not be getting the adequate care that they need from our criminal justice system, what is our solution? The solution here is going to be the Restore program. So again, this is a pilot research program based out of Arizona. It addresses date and acquaintance rape where force did not exceed a certain amounts to be seen as unwanted. And this is also going to be non-penetrated sex offenses. So we're going to be talking about how they collaborate with feminist advocates and the steps of the Restore program. So as far as these steps, there's a few different ways that we find that somebody is eligible for the program and that they would be a good fit. So the responsible parties, also known as offenders, would undergo psychosexual evaluations, and they would be set up on a sex offender treatment plan that would be developed and implemented specifically for them. They would also be regularly monitored for 12 months. Another nice thing about this program is it would give survivors and their offenders an opportunity to meet face-to-face with their community support groups, whoever that may be. And survivors have the opportunity to describe what happened to them, how they were harmed, and how the incident has impacted their life. Offenders are also able to explain what their intention is to right their wrongs. They have a opportunity to apologize. And when they are setting up the intention of how they're going to right their wrongs, this is not just to the offender, but also how they're going to make it up to the community itself. So an agreement is written and overseen to make sure that an offender is staying compliant to what they had talked about that they wanted to do to right their wrongs. However, in a program like this, it is very easy to accidentally have secondary victimization. So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen here. And because of that, the Restore program was incorporating feminist theories and the response to and took a response to feminist critiques when creating the restorative justice response for violence against women. So there are many key feminist concepts. We're going to start with the liberal feminists. So liberal feminists are also known as rule equality feminists. They pretty much argue that the formal equal treatment of men and women will result in equality. So pretty much everybody should be treated the same. Stereotypes should not be used to differentiate women and men. And right now, the failure of system violence on women is seen as a less of an offense than the violence on men. So pretty much if a woman is being sexually assaulted, it's often seen as not as serious of a crime as if a male was sexually assaulted or if he just had some violence that was done to him. Moving forward, we have the cultural feminists. So a cultural feminist, they have basically the belief that traditional institutions such as religious institutions, political, economical, judicial, they're all masculine in nature and practice. So they really see that there's that hierarchy that embraces men, and women had a disadvantage from the beginning. In order to alleviate this, people should recognize that women experiences and contributions, and in recognizing the experiences and contributions, you would be able to help to promote equality. Dominance feminism is basically talking about how males have dominance over women, and that happens most directly through sex or sexuality. So the resource program focuses on sexual violence towards women, and thus is it's pretty much bringing into perspective that dominance feminism and going off what they're talking about. Marxist feminism is looking at gender through a lens of class and economic oppression. And this is talking about oppression in the public and the private spheres. And this is going all the way back to, you want to be thinking about how women weren't able to have private property, how the organization, or I guess how our society is organized economically is disadvantaging to women. So men have always been at the top, and then women are a little further at the bottom. They haven't always had the same rights. So as far as a Marxist feminist would be concerned, the only way to liberate women would be to overthrow the economic order that we currently have in society. The socialist feminism is really just highlighting the fact that women have high victimization rates by men, and they feel that the only way that women can truly be liberated is through radical social changes. Contemporary postmodern feminism, they pretty much advocate to have a complete reconstruction of what society understands as available gender roles. They believe that legal discourse was created for categories of women in law and are continuing to be regulated. So women are at a disadvantage in law, and that is because the certain gender roles that we place on males and females. And finally, multiracial feminists, they believe that race shapes the social relations in our society. Multiracial feminists actually criticize the other feminist theories for ignoring race, and they believe that this stems from a long history. So for example, Native women have a higher rate of rape than any other race group, like Native American women. So the average rape rate for women is 1.9 per every 1,000 people or 1,000 women. However, for Native American women, it's 7.2 per 1,000. So that's 3 times the rape rate of white women, and that's double the rate of African American women. And multiracial feminists believe that this stems all the way back from colonization. So as y'all know, kind of from history back in the day, African Americans are linked to slavery, and they were often raped by white men. This was not seen as a heinous crime when you compare it to if a white woman would have had sex with a black man. In that second instance, men were often lynched or went through terrible beatings because of that. Women, on the other hand, were not seen as, it wasn't as much of a concern as it would have been if it was the other way around. That being said, with the Restore program, it is taken into consideration that race could possibly skew the way the program is ran, and there is definitely guidance and monitoring that will be implemented to make sure that it does not turn into whites and non-whites being treated differently in response to how they're going to be using the restorative justice for their sexual assault cases. Now that we've kind of touched base on all the different feminist theories that were thought of and incorporated within this program, we're going to be talking about the feminist concerns about restorative justice responses to violence against women. So there's three main ones. The first one being physical and emotional well-being of the victims. As we had talked about earlier, with this program, there would be a point in which the survivor and the offender or the aggressor would meet face-to-face. And so this would be a point of contact through the conference, and there is a concern that there may be additional violence that could take place there. Maybe not necessarily physical violence, but we are more concerned about possible emotional or psychological violence that could occur. The rebuttal to this is that the program would be primarily focusing on acquaintance sexual assaults and date sexual assaults. Acquaintance sexual assaults have a significantly lower risk of repeated violence than, let's say, an ongoing domestic situation. However, victims have stated that psychological and emotional abuse is often more traumatic than that physical abuse, especially when an offender denies their behavior and victim blames. There is lack of research in this area, so it would have to be closely watched and guarded for throughout the program. And Restore's additional rebuttal to that is that they are doing the pre-screens to see who would be a good fit to benefit from the program. So hopefully that can clear out some of these people that would be thinking about re-offending or causing that secondary victimization. The second concern was a skewed agreement between the parties. So as we just talked about, there was going to be an agreement set forth of how the offender could possibly right their wrongs. A concern is that victims are going to be so overwhelmed and scared about what the offender may be thinking or how they could be compromised that out of fear, they're going to just go with whatever the offender wants. This can also be dictated, like let's say the offender and the victim have children together. The woman may feel that she does not necessarily have that free choice because she does have the children to think about as well. So there is a fear of reconciliation as well. One thing that the program is not trying to advocate for is for offenders to apologize to victims and for them to feel that the apology is enough and now they want to have reconciliation and restart their relationship. That is not something that the program is advocating for, and it is definitely a concern and something that would have to be monitored so that it does not happen. Lastly, because of the lack of research in this area, there is definitely skepticism about the program's effectiveness and how it will be able to address underlying systematic oppressions of these women. However, right now, as we see the research, there is not necessarily anything that the criminal justice system is doing that's making victims feel as though they are being heard and that they do have that support. So in blunt terms, this program would be better than nothing, and it does have the great potential to be beneficial to victims. So in conclusion, the goal of the Restore program would be to provide consequences for any sexual violence, to have that conferencing and that face-to-face interaction so that victims feel heard and they can tell their side of the story, and that offenders can also be able to admit about their wrongdoings. There's less of a structural hierarchy framework because you're talking to each other one-on-one, so it's not necessarily that one person is overpowering another, especially because each of the individuals are coming with their support group that's also putting in their input, so it should be equal across the board as far as who has the power in the situation. This ties into addressing any economic inequalities and hopefully will stop this narrative of a powerless victim and an empowered offender.